Welcome to our Commerce Reimagined series, highlighting our visionaries, our trailblazers, and the people who are changing the way we are defining innovation, technology, and commerce. And I'm going to add the word community for our speaker today. I am Beth Ann Kaminkow. I'm the Global CEO of VMLY&R Commerce, and I am joined today with Susan McPherson to our virtual stage. Susan McPherson is a serial connector. She is a seasoned communicator and founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies. It's a communication consultancy focused on the intersection of brands and social impact. She is the author of The Lost Art of Connecting, the Gather, Ask, Do method for building meaningful relationships. So we're going to get into that today with Susan. She has 25 years of experience that she's drawing from in marketing, public relations, and sustainability communications, speaking regularly at industry conferences and contributing to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company magazine, Forbes. She's appeared on NPR, on CNN, USA Today, The New Yorker, and we are so happy and privileged to have her with us today. She is also a Brooklynite for any of you out there from NYC or any of the boroughs. So Susan, welcome.
Oh, I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so very much. And happy Friday.
There you go.
Today where we're taping.
Exactly. That will help people know the kind of frame of mind that the two of us are in right now, right? So I'd like to start from the start in terms of the book. You were writing or finishing a book during a global pandemic. Did that shift, shape, or change the book you were writing? And let's talk a little bit about the process of writing a book, because I think many people out there sort of have a book in them. Yeah. And they're not sure when and how to commit. So I'd love to hear just at the very start about that process.
Well, I think it's important, excuse me, to a lot of folks feel that I wrote the book as a response to the pandemic, to the loneliness of the pandemic, to our desire to connect. And actually, the book proposal was created 4 years ago. And the actual proposal was created in my desire to bring the humanity back in connecting, in networking, in building community, because what I had seen all too often, and myself included, was we were becoming slaves to the clicks and the likes and followers as the means to determine whether we were being successful making connections, when in actuality, we should be looking at the impact those connections have, both on our personal and professional lives. So for those of you thinking of writing a book, it's a long process. So it took 4 years to get from there to the actual writing process, which began in February of 2020. And my goal of writing the book was to bring that humanity back and to try to get away from relying on technology. And of course, in March, the world shut down and all we had was were the technology tools and the clicks and the likes and followers. So, there was a few weeks of just deep kind of seated frustration and terror. It was like, wow, what am I going to do now, right? I have to kind of shift gears. But through about 35 interviews that I did for the book, through about 8 months of the pandemic, where I talked to folks about their intentionality and how they were connecting. Yes, we were all using technology, but we were being more mindful when we were reaching out, or on the proverbial Zoom rooms, Microsoft Teams rooms, where we would be in the chat session, actually asking each other how we were. So, but by speaking with those leaders who have made connection part of their success, or basically derive their success from those connections, it gave me a lot of optimism looking into the future. Because I do believe as we move to probably what will be a hybrid situation of some sorts, I do believe people are going to be much more intentional when they connect, when they reach out to others. And maybe I'm wearing rose-colored glasses if I check, but I do believe when we are back out at events, we're not going to be looking over the shoulder to think, what is the shinier object or person to talk to, or who's more important in the room, and instead having real meaningful conversations.
It's so funny that you talk about this, the chat that became part of our lives because of this digital forum. And, it's almost analogous to like the comment section. down that you get online, the benefit of like, you didn't get that when you read a newspaper, or it's like a streaming grouping of comments and what everybody else thinks about a topic. It has dimensionalized, I think, the online world really well. And it's going to be interesting actually to see how we can bring that back in some either hybrid way or physical way, because there is something really genuine about that second conversation. We talk about the second screen that can, to your point, be sometimes very disruptive, especially if it's a speaker looking out over an audience and you see people with the second screen. But how we embrace that chat and that ability to have a human level of conversation and real-time interaction going on is an interesting one to go solve for. But I'd like to go back to two kind of points now. You landed on the word connections. It could have been networking. It could have been framed as a number of different, a number of different language choices. So I want to understand your thinking about, landing there, because I think from reading, it's very intentional, and also your background. Like, why was that the thing that you chose to make your first book on? To really take as your topic and your subject.
Well, from a professional standpoint, I founded my company at age 48. I'm now 56. Over the last 8 years, 95% of our business has been inbound. And what that actually very intentionally showed me was all those connections I made, all those meetings I took, all those introductions that happened, those people I supported in my 20s, my 30s, and a good part of my 40s actually have come back to help me. And it wasn't like I had a crystal ball when I was 27 and think, well, in 20 years, I'm going to run a business, so I'm going to come calling to, that wasn't even a figment of my imagination. So also, I grew up in a house or a home in the late 60s, early 70s with two parents who were very much intentional connectors. And for watching them, for my formative years, I just assumed every parent was like that. And I joke, but it's the truth. Every morning at the breakfast table, there would be the 5 local newspapers, plus yesterday's New York Times and yesterday's Boston Globe. I grew up in upstate New York. And both my parents would be sitting there with their razor blade or scissors, clipping and cutting articles that would be of interest to people that were in their community, people they wanted to be in their community. In my dad's case, he was a professor at a women's college for close to 40 years. He'd be sending to students, former students, daughters of students. And then they would go to their manual typewriters, each of them, and type short little missives, thinking of you, sending love, very, very short, but intentional, put in envelopes, and then off to the US mail. So I just assumed everybody did that. And of course, fast forward all these years where we have so many technology tools to be more efficient about this, I have continued their tradition. What I have tried to do is do it, again, with love, with compassion, with the ability to listen, to receive. And thankfully, because of technology, we have been able to do that. The challenge is when we've let technology get the better of us, as opposed to, having that humanity. So I also credit every bit of any success I have had in life with the people that I have met along the way, whether they have been people in power, whether they have been, somebody I met at a restaurant, you name it. And to me, that is another kind of lesson I learned very early on, that every single person, even if we don't perceive them to be able to help us, we don't know what we don't know. And if we don't open that door and lead with curiosity, we will never know. And we're missing huge opportunities. Again, both personally and professionally.
I love that. Lead with curiosity. And I was thinking as you were talking, if you were standing up there to the class of graduating class of 2021, your advice would be that lead with curiosity, and that idea of, connections at the beginning of your career, to imagine having that wisdom at the heart of that, what leads your career.
Oh my goodness. Every single thing. If we had ultimate hours to chat, I could tell you so many different ways that different people, but we have to be open to meeting those people. And I think sometimes, when you're talking to people fresh out of college, you need to explain to them why building connections are powerful. And also, I do want to just say, I like to delineate between connecting and networking. I am not anti-networking by any stretch of the imagination, but I do see them to be separate. right?
You do now have a methodology
Yeah.
that you were able to then think through, gather, ask, do.
Yes.
Talk to us about that. One, the recognition that there was probably something that was a pattern that you did in this, and then how, and what that means for others that are now going to pick that up and try to, model after that.
Thank you for asking that. And yes, gather, ask, do is the methodology I lay out in the book. And the first and most important part of the gather phase is actually looking internally, doing deep self-reflection to determine what are your goals, hopes, and dreams over the next 4 years, 4 months, even 4 weeks. And again, personally and professionally. And who are the connections and contacts you want to meet to help you reach those goals? Okay. And who are the connections that you want to reconnect with that are going to help you meet those goals? So it's a grounding of sorts. But also within the gather phase, you need to think about what are your secret superpowers or chief differentiating factors is what I call it in the book, so that when you go out and actually meet with people personally, professionally, you know what you can offer. Because the underlying principle of gather, ask, do is leading with how can I be of help? How can I be of service? Lastly, within the gather phase, what are you going to do to make sure that your connections, your communities don't look like you, sound like you, the same age as you, the same racial design, culture, all of the things, to ensure it is not just like you, because that is how we grow. That is how we learn more about the world, about ourselves. And if professionally we are in marketing or sales, it's vitally important to be successful. So that's the gather phase. The ask phase is actually, and for anyone in sales or business development, this is hugely important. It's learning how to ask the meaningful questions of others, your prospects, your business partners, et cetera, to understand what is it that they are facing as challenges? What are their hopes and dreams? And if you listen very, very carefully, which we are woefully bad at doing, myself included, but if we do, then we have all the data to move to my favorite phase, which is the do phase. And that's when you take what you've listened to, what you've heard, and then you react and respond to it in ways that you are best doing so. Again, back to that, what are your secret sauces? What are your superpowers? So this way you can be responsive, you can follow up, you can become trustworthy. And quite frankly, both personally and professionally, that's what we want to be. So that is essentially the gather, ask, do. And I will go so far as say, the bizarre times we are living in right now, it's a real healthy time to do the gather, ask, do.
What I like about that, listening to it too, is, some of the insights that I'm thinking through are in the gather phase. There's an almost internal confidence piece. When you think about what gets in the way sometimes of our really connecting, like truly making the connection, is sometimes more about ourselves and sometimes our own, whether it's imposter syndrome or lack of confidence, maybe some insecurities. That almost by coming, anchoring it on what is it about ourselves that actually brings something to the ask, to the equation, to the relationship, recognizing that it's not just about the ask itself, but it's about what we're going to be giving first in that exchange. I think it frees you up from some of that insecurity potentially, right?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, I joke because, and when I do talks with big audience, I always say, can I see a show of hands? How many people have you connected with in the last year on LinkedIn that within seconds, they responded with the offer to sell you something? And of course, 99% of people raise their hands. And I then say, what if that person had done maybe 3 to 5 minutes of research about you, maybe could sense there was something going on in your life that they could be helpful with, or a connection they could make. What if instead, when they reached back out to you, they made that offer and then offered or told them some way they were going to be trying to market to you? How much better would that feel to receive, right? And of course, show of hands. So that is why I believe fervently that it is so important, one, to determine all the ways we can be helpful. And every single one of us, whether we just graduated college or approaching retirement, have things. We don't have to be millionaires to be helpful to others. We all have connections. We all have knowledge. We all have skills. So to me, if we go with that frame and lead with how we can be helpful, the world will help us. This is not about not taking the oxygen mask first.
So then the next third, the middle bucket of what you're asking about, the ask, I also think is super important for all of us, because that discipline to really think through the questions, to go with that curious open mind, I think is also the next really important piece. And I love how you're slowing people down to kind of really think through the crux of the ask, and leading with questions that are going to open up the insights and the information that we need about the other person.
As we build our connections, as we build our communities, we have more people to tap, more resources. So if we can't help, we may know someone who does. And one of the amazing people I interviewed in the book was a woman named Ruth Ann Harnish, who's a philanthropist, a coach, just an extraordinarily accomplished woman. And she has taught me over the years this notion of being very direct, and not being afraid to say, I can't help you right now, but I may be able to help you down the road. Or can you be specific about how I can be helpful, so that you have parameters around, right? And we all know there are going to be people that when you ask them if you can be helpful, they're going to maybe think there's some outside agenda. And you know what I say? You have to walk away from those people, right? I mean, there's 8 billion people on this planet, right? I mean, and we tend to, and believe me, again, I'm always looking at myself as my worst enemy, but it took me many years to be able to get over that and be able to walk away from those people. But, there are enough people that will be filled with gratitude for any type of introduction or connection. And again, I don't do it to get the gratitude. I do it because I love the impact that actually happens when you make the connections.
So take us through a couple examples. I'd love to hear an example where things just really opened up and came together because of someone asked you, someone leveraged you in that way. And I'd love to hear an example of an ask that you put out there. Maybe that's even simpler, closer in.
On the offering of help, or being asked to, I could give you thousands of examples, but one that I think is really momentous in my mind happened in 2017 or 2016. And it was a very busy day at my company, McPherson Strategies. The emails were flying. I think, honestly, it was like 2:40 in the afternoon. And I was coming up, on the 3:00 hour where I had a meeting. And I received an email from a friend who said, "Dear Susan, can you help my friend Brant, a filmmaker, get into a refugee camp tomorrow in Greece?" Now, to level the playing field, one of the boards I serve on is the UN Refugee Organization, UN High Commission for Refugees. So it wasn't so far out in left field. But then I thought, I have 20 minutes before the next meeting. I'm going to make a few calls. I did. I was able to get this gentleman into the camp the next day. I learned a week later he was actually not a documentary filmmaker. He was a big budget Hollywood producer, director who had done a number of Tom Cruise films. And not being like part of that Hollywood world, it was kind of like, oh my God. Then about a month later, a dear friend reached out who was a advisor to the global NGO CARE. And she said to me, "Susan, do you happen to know a filmmaker or two who could go spend a couple of weeks in Jordan at a refugee camp to teach Syrian youth how to actually make film so that they can tell the story of their harrowing escape from their home country?" Well, guess what? I had the person to call. I called Brant. Within 2 minutes, he said yes. He not only went, but he brought 8 other Hollywood filmmakers with him. They spent 2 weeks with about 20 of these youth, helping them learn how to make film, to tell their stories. Because of that, a major foundation, the Epic Foundation, funded a film academy at that refugee camp that still exists today. But there's more. Brant went on to raise millions of dollars for UNHCR, UNICEF, CARE, and various other organizations. And he created a narrative feature film that Angelina Jolie actually saw. And she is an advocate for refugees globally. She is now taking that film to world leaders so that they do not fail to understand the enormity that there are 88 million displaced people on this planet. So long and short of it, get rid of our preconceived notions. And when you can, do the help.
Oh, what a story. And how that must feel for you to just know that you had a role in all of that too. Last question, and we'll end on sort of your advice for us re-entering the world. So if you bring all this learning and insight over the years into this moment that we find ourselves in, where what I've found most fascinating is sort of a bit more apprehension, even to re-entering work. We were so sad to have to leave and to get so isolated. But then as we adapted and adjusted, obviously there were also silver linings and insights that came out of it. But I think it's now created a little bit of a friction, and in some ways even more of a barrier for some of us to get more socially connected, physically, humanly out there again. How would you apply all of this wisdom and learning, and certainly your book? And we would recommend people, now this is the perfect time to pick up the book. But what is that? The thing that you think is at the heart of this that you would tell people in terms of bringing them back into?
Sure. Well, it's so individual. And, I think one of the things that's been a bit unnerving is how quickly we went from 0 to 60, right? I mean, it was kind of like one day we were all in our hermetically sealed bubbles, and the next day it was like masks off. And I think, number one, none of us had a chance to kind of grieve what we had been through. I mean, and this is a global thing. And we know there are many countries where they are still very much in quarantine. So for anybody who is listening or watching this podcast, my heart goes out to you if you're still in those situations. But I think this really has to go back to that internal reflection and what is comfortable. Don't force yourself. We've never in our lifetimes experienced anything like this. There's not a roadmap or rule book that we can all follow. But I think first, get a sense of what is you're capable of handling. All right. And start small. You don't have to throw yourself into a room of 60 people right away. Okay. Get together with 1 or 2 trusted friends, trusted colleagues, and start there. Go for a walk if you feel uncomfortable sitting in a restaurant or a public space. And then literally kind of map out over the next 6 months, what are you hoping to achieve? And then think about how are you going to go about doing that? Because inevitably we are all going to be back out in some sense of normalcy. I do believe we are going to be in this hybrid workspace. And, those of us who feel more comfortable reaching out are going to actually probably find ourselves to be a little bit more successful. I mean, it's just, for good and bad, right? But I also think, company leaders who have privilege and power need to be listening to their employees. They need to be, just because statistics say 80% of workers want to go back to work or 80% of workers don't want to go back, which is quite frankly what I'm seeing, which is insane, right? They're kind of, crossing each other out. But I think you really need to reach out to your own colleagues, your own people, and be like, how do you want to move forward? And give people options, at least for the next year. I think it's like, let's give people grace. We have been through holy hell, and many have suffered incredible losses and livelihoods. So I think it's patience, it's giving ourselves grace, but it's also a time to let's use this pandemic for all its misery and use it as a time to reconnect in whatever way feels comfortable to you. So phone, email, text, you name it, but just whatever feels right to you.
Thank you, Susan. That's just what we all needed to hear right now. So again, appreciate so much you writing this book and you giving us your time. Again, everyone, it's Susan McPherson. I'm sure she would be more than happy to expand her community with you in it. And, take a look at The Lost Art of Connecting, the Gather, Ask, Do method. So over to you all to make the connections happen. And thank you again, Susan. Very much appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.